Please give a nice big round of applause to Brook.
Good morning. How are you doing? So, about 8 months ago, somebody came to me and said, could you give a talk on AI? Now, I've been kicking around machine learning for a little while, since about 2014 or so. So I thought, you know, how hard can this be? And immediately, what do? I start going and researching, playing with the bots, doing everything. So this is the result of this talk. I do want to say one thing, though. I have a lot of employees in Nigeria. Not everyone in Nigeria is a scammer. Just want to be clear, there's 210 million people in Nigeria, and there's maybe a few thousand Yahoo boys, that's what they're called, Yahoo boys, and they're not confined entirely to Nigeria. I was just talking to a Ghanaian candidate, and I said, you got Yahoo boys? And he said, yeah, we got a few. So, yeah, just to be clear about that, 210 million and our Nigerian employees are great. Okay, we've been hearing a lot. If you've been looking at any papers or tech journals or whatever, you've probably seen a lot of chatter about the existential threat of AI, super intelligent AI. Let's talk about that first and kind of get it out of the way, if you will. Let's talk about that. Obviously, these are some quotes for you. Software's coming to eat, you know, everything is software. Well, that is actually pretty true. I'm giving a keynote at Global AppSec DC at the end of this month, and that's kind of the text of it. You'll get the high level here, which is software is everywhere. Of the people on this planet, approximately 8 billion, somewhere close to 7 billion their lives are dependent in one way or another on software. That's pretty profound change in human adaptation. Pretty profound. About 7 billion of us. And you know, if you're in DC, come to my keynote and I'll dig into that number quite a bit more. So that we are dependent on software should be pretty clear, and you know, that's true. But is AI coming to eat our lunch? Well, yes and no, I think. Yes and no. Let's examine that a little bit. Elon Musk, I'm not a big Elon Musk follower, but he said that a maximally curious, super intelligent AI would be beneficial for human beings. And I want to just examine that a little bit, if you don't mind, for a moment. Because it turns out that years ago, and I'm years old, older than the last speaker, and thank you, David Echu, for setting me up so well. There's a lot of things that's similar in our decks, and I'll gloss over the things you've covered. I had to study genetics in college. And at the time, we didn't have things like CRISPR. We couldn't really look at DNA the way we can today. And so we did fruit flies because their evolution is very fast. And there's a guy named Dobzhansky. Anybody know who Dobzhansky was? Anybody actually study Dobzhansky in here? Am I the only one? Yeah. Well, you had to study Dobzhansky if you did anything with genetics. And his thing was fruit flies. And we weren't very kind to the fruit flies. We were maximally curious about evolution in fruit flies, but not very kind to the fruit flies. They were lucky if they got a rotten apple. Yeah, so I'm not sure. This is a writer, and he said, yeah, Scott Alexander, and he said, yeah, maximally curious. I don't think so. It could be maximally curious, as he says, about human suffering versus human goodies. So, yeah, I don't think Mr. Musk is on it too well here. But you know, let's look at some of the larger terrible things that are going on just for a moment. And David went into a bunch of these in greater detail, so I'm not going to do that. This is a bunch of attacks that some academics are doing to get AIs, chatbots, to do weird things, and David went into this pretty well. There's a lot of prompt engineering going on, and to get AIs to return stuff they're not supposed to do. A lot of that. As far as I know, it's actually entirely academic and security researchers at the moment. We'll get into some really serious stuff in a moment that is actually going on. But this is entirely, what can we get this thing to do? That will change, obviously. That will change. But right at the moment, it's pretty academic. This is real. Anybody worried about this in here? AI. Do you want an AI to control the nuclear codes for the United States? Anybody in favor of that? As we will see, I think that's probably not a good idea. But this is going to come more and more and more. Why? Because if one side does it, the other side has to do it. And that's kind of one of the determiners that we're going to look at here. If one side does it, the other side has to do it. So yeah, we should be worried, I think. There are some new forms coming along. I love this piece of research. How about taking a mouse brain and a chip and putting them together? It was able to learn Pong in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. How to play Pong. Yeah. This is going out of science fiction and coming into science now. So yeah, going to be some new things here. But let's examine and kind of dispense with the super intelligent. It's theoretical. And as we will see, it's maybe far-fetched to say that AIs are actually doing what our brains do, which is to be able to abstract one pattern and apply it to other things. Not that humans always do that perfectly or even correctly, but we can do that, and we do that. That's one of our superpowers, if you will. We may not be the only species that does that, but we certainly can do it. And AI can't yet. So I'm not personally worried about super intelligent AI right at the moment. I'd rather focus on the sorts of things that David S.E was just talking about, which are real. Everything he said is real. And that's the sort of thing I want to talk about, if you will. So what is the problem space? What is the problem space? Well, AI is good at some things, and it's not so good at others. All right? Let's be really clear. This fella, Matt Rickard, has been testing AIs for a while to do various things. Now, I want to tell you, my first introduction to machine learning was when I led product security architecture at McAfee circa 2012 through 2018. And we were using machine learning at that time. Duh. So does anybody think that McAfee was all as signature based in the after like 2002 or 2003? Anybody really believe that? No. Nobody could survive that way. Although I'd go to conferences and I'd say I work at McAfee, and they say, oh, you're the signature-based people. No, wait a minute. So that was always a little funny. But nevertheless, we were using machine learning at the time, as everyone who was in the malware detection business was. Everyone. Why? Because you're looking at billions and billions and billions of samples. Think about polymorphic. It changes just almost every time it runs. You gotta get ahead of that. And so we had big machine learning models along with a lot of other technology, and that is circa 2013, 2014. However, and I won't go into too much history here because David did it, there was a big leap. There was a big leap, and that leap can be wired directly to 2015, November. Google had been training its machine learning, used the most modern techniques at the time, and Google Translate. Did anybody notice in November 2015 that suddenly Google Translate went from word salad, and I could maybe figure out what it was translating, to something that looked like human speech? Anybody remember that big change? 2015, November, that's when it went live. And it went live in like 7 languages. And that was a huge change. And that, we can go directly to that moment and say that's when machine learning actually became real in a fundamental way, when we really started to understand how to build these models. 2015, November. Well, that's when it went live. Obviously, they'd been working on it for a while. You know, I'm not going to go into that, but it was very good. Suddenly it was very good, at least in a few languages, and not word salad. It still gets word salad, you know, it still puts the verb in the wrong place once in a while and whatever, but it's a lot better, isn't it? And now we have little devices you can carry around with you. You want to walk around in France and it'll speak to everybody and then translate back to English for you, so you don't actually have to learn a language. But there are a lot of good reasons to learn a language, by the way. My French is terrible. Yeah, but they're good at that. They're good at things like writing style, because they have a lot of writing to look at, good and bad, right? There's a lot of stuff out there. So they're quite good at that. I'm trying to get I'm teaching computer and ethics this fall at the University of Montana, near where I live. And I'm trying to remind my students not to write with ChatGPT, but they should use it to correct their grammar. Because, you know, any tool, and when they get out in the real world, they're all going to be using ChatGPT to generate content, right? So they ought to get used to it now. Yeah, it's very good at that. It's very good at generating names. One of the problems we have, anybody use it for, you think about going through NVD, National Vulnerability Database. Product names are not normalized. Researchers put in whatever they can think of. Sometimes they use the official product name, sometimes they use the commonly, used, sometimes they abbreviate it, whatever. Well, ChatGPT, it turns out, you say, give me all the variations. It's very good at coming out all the Now, please, could I have the few substrings that handle all these variations, and then I can use that to search NVD really fast. It's very good at that sort of thing. As we heard, it's very good at writing code for you. And then you have to ask it, now, is this code vulnerable for, yeah, because it might not spot that. Copilot has been trained on the 4 million vulnerabilities that are in the open source on GitHub. Yeah, it has. I actually spent an hour and a half talking to the GitHub folks about this, and they're working hard on it. They are. They're actually trying to address that problem. Very good at brainstorming. Give me a list of ideas here. Writing a fiction novel, well, if you want the fiction to look pretty much just like, all of that fiction that sits on the stand at the checkout stand at the grocery store, yeah, it probably could do that. But would it really be original? I actually asked ChatGPT to write me a fantasy outline for a fantasy novel. And I could probably write that. I've never written a fantasy novel, although one of the hallucinations, as we'll hear, is that I'm a fantasy novel writer. But yeah, I've never written a novel. I don't know how to write fiction. I have written a lot about computer security, and you can see my books if you want. I'm not selling them. I don't get paid that much, but I have written a lot of words about computer security. Have I written many words in fiction? None. So yeah, but nevertheless, then I asked it for one for a mystery, and the outline looked exactly the same, only the details were slightly different. So that's kind of, what it can do. It turns out it's not very creative. And we're going to dig into that a little bit in a moment. Who's using ChatGPT? Well, importantly, as we saw, attackers are using these models. And you know, you can get a 7 billion trained 7 billion LLM open source. You know, you can just download it, and then they've optimized it to run on a modern machine. This is, you know, this is not fiction. This is for real, right? And does anybody remember circa 2019, 2020? Well, by 2020, we didn't go to RSA because it got canceled and all of that. But has anybody, 2019, 2018, every security marketer said ours is AI, ours is machine learning. It was a thing there for a while. Luckily, that's sort of passed, and now we're on to something else. But at the moment, it was really hard to distinguish. You had to talk to them to figure out, oh, no, that's heuristics, sorry. That's not machine learning. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Okay, fine. Whatever. But yeah, that was a little loop that we went through. And luckily, I think we're slightly past that. Or is everything going to be LLM based next year at RSA? I don't know. At the expo, has anybody talked to the people at the expo? Is every product using an LLM? No, I don't think so. We'll get there. But search, obviously, certain kinds of writers, all these things, this is who's using it. But we're not where it's everywhere yet, I don't think. Anybody think LLM is absolutely ubiquitous at this point? I don't think so. But we're going that direction. I think my students today who are going to graduate in the next 1 or 2 years, by the time they're, you know, mid-career, this will just be the normal technology they use. That's my personal opinion for what it's worth. So let's look at some foes, okay? You know, I don't think the Matrix is coming to plug into the back of your head anytime soon. But, yeah, I could be wrong, of course. One of the biggest problems, and David talked about this, is training. And, you know, he was talking about data poisoning and some other things which are important. Let me dispense with data poisoning, though, on a large scale. The first thing that I said when I learned we had machine learning as the security guy at McAfee was, well, how do we protect the data so our training data is correct? Now, imagine, we had billions and billions and billions of malware samples, as you can imagine, being an old malware company. Billions of samples. And so I said, my gosh, somebody could inject in this way. And they looked at me and said, Brook, if they inject 10 million samples, which we might notice because it would be weird, it wouldn't make any difference. Think about the numbers here. It's a slight statistical anomaly. So in order to poison one of these sets, you have to have a lot of data. Because remember what David said, it takes a lot of data to train these things. A lot. We have 130 billion data sample models now. I think that's what I just read. I forget which model has 130 billion. But yeah, 130 billion. That's a lot of samples. 10 million is a blip. And getting 10 billion in there and noticing that somebody's injecting 10 billion might fire off somebody monitoring. We hope they're monitoring. We do hope they're monitoring this sort of thing. But that's not really the problem. The problem is that for a very long time, who was represented on the internet? Remember, these things are trained on the internet. Was our 7 billion people, have they all had websites? No. Who's had websites? What my friends lovingly call from Nigeria and Ghana and some of these other Philippines and whatnot, the minority world. Because remember, they're the majority, right? And if you count numbers. They call us the minority world. The people living in our bubble who drive cars and have smartphones and laptops and fly in airplanes all the time and you know, that's the people who had websites. And were all of those websites true? Everything that's out there on the internet, can you believe everything you read? No, anybody could start a website. There was this whole period when everyone was starting websites. I have a website called brookschoenfield.com because I thought I should brand myself at one point. And yeah, I think maybe 10 people follow it. But it's in the training set in there somewhere. Yeah, it is. Not that it's a blip. Who listens to Brook Schoenfield? Almost nobody. So yeah, but yeah, there's a real exclusion going on here, which is why I threw up the redlining districts as a background image. There's a real exclusion. If you go back to the Wayback Machine, it doesn't represent humanity. We all know that some of the face recognition technologies don't do very well with people with darker shades of human skin, right? They don't do very well. And so, you know, that's a problem when we train these things. There's a built-in bias because the training data does not represent the people who have to use the model, which is 7 billion people. Yeah, I know I'm sort of expanding that, probably not that many right at this moment, but over time, they're going to be using, and it's going to take a while for all those people who are underrepresented or not represented to get into the samples that get into the training, then they get there. So it's a real problem for people who are excluded getting a model that represents how they live. That's a problem, in my opinion. Not to mention trainer bias. There was a study that just happened that looked at the politics of several of the big models. And guess what? OpenAI has a progressive bent, interestingly. And Llama, it has a conservative bent. Why do you think that is? I would guess it's trainer bias, right? Because there are humans saying, yes, that was the right answer, there's not a right answer. There are models that have been trained that say, yes, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer, when you're doing training, right? And so you get these biases built into the models. Yes, OpenAI. And so of course, that just means that if you want to stay in your bubble, only use the model that agrees with your politics. So all the conservative people, please go to Llama and we can separate ourselves in yet another way. I'm revealing my own politics, I'm sorry. I'm going to go to the model that disagrees with my politics the most because I like talking to people who don't agree with me because I might learn something. I might even change my mind. What a concept. But if you want to stay in your bubble, you can. Just go to the model that fits your worldview. No, I'm kidding, of course. But still, that's an interesting little factoid. Not only that, let's talk about noise. Noise is really important here. David touched on it in terms of stenography, but there's some interesting other plays here. Remember that an image, when learned by an LLM, what is it? They're really looking at the pixels? No. They're looking at the samples. It's samples, right? It's millions of samples, which are numbers, right? They're just numbers. It's just a list of numbers in some format. Whether it's JPEG or PNG or whatever, it's just a list of numbers that represent the pixels. So it looks at the patterns in there. Well, Steve Grobman, who was CTO of McAfee when I was there, don't know what he's doing today, brilliant guy, Intel fellow, and if you get to be an Intel fellow, oh my God, that's another level of smart that's way beyond me. I was an Intel distinguished engineer, and that's one level of accomplishment, but it's nothing like the fellows. They're scary smart. Well, Steve decided to play with machine learning that identified things, and he took a 9. And of course, the model said, yes, 9. This is back in 2016-ish or so, 9. But then He introduced noise such that when you and I look at it, it's still a 9. But guess what the model said? Cat. Meow. So, yeah, they're very sensitive in a way that our ability to look at something is not so sensitive. And that does worry me, because an adversary with sufficient control could introduce the kind of noise we wouldn't know, that a trainer wouldn't know, but which the model would know. Now, let's examine that from a malware, for instance, just as one possibility. Let's just think about that. One of the things malware has to do in order to fool people is it has to look like a program. But it turns out, and I know this from McAfee, that the things that malware do on your computer to be malware, no application will do. And if you remove all the cruft, malware begins to be a lot more easy to identify. I probably just gave away a trade secret, but probably not. But that's a fact, right? They just have to do things that regular programs don't do. And so, and in ways that regular programs don't. So they put in a lot of cruft. They put in a lot of obfuscation code that looks like it's doing something. Well, that noise is easy to generate with a bot, isn't it? With an LLM or a genAI. Not the same thing, by the way. That's very easy to do. And if you think the well-resourced adversaries like nation states are not doing that, we know they've been using machine learning to build malware since we were using machine learning to identify malware. So almost 10 years at least. So yeah, okay. And then there's the problem of obsolete data. Is there any obsolete data out on the internet? Anybody know what the number is? I just looked at a study and it said approximately 83%. So, you know, 4/5 of what's out there is stuff that's old and obsolete. Yeah, so you're going to get obsolete answers, potentially. All right. And this is because of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's very important here. I always like to throw the Dunning-Kruger effect in here because many people in security don't know about it, but you should. And what is the Dunning-Kruger effect? Amongst humans, when people learn a little, they think they're masters and they know everything. And when they learn a lot, they know, oh my gosh, I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. And so that's why, no, I know we have divas in security. I know we do that. But talk to a lot of experts, and they will say, yeah, but Joe down the thing and Marie over there, they're really the smart ones. Because people who've been doing this and know what they're doing learn, oh my gosh, there's a lot I don't know, right? So that's Dunning-Kruger. And a great deal of what's been written on the internet is written with Dunning-Kruger. It's people who don't know what they're talking about. And all of that's going into the training, just so you know. All right, I've talked about malware. David talked about malware. It is happening. It's going on. I want to tell you something. There is even a chatbot on the dark web called WormGPT. Somehow I missed that slide. It's in here somewhere. Maybe it's coming up. ChatGPT, WormGPT, which for 50 euros a month or 550 euros a year will write malware for you. And they're not even very expensive, right? Yeah, I'm not making this up. This is real. Luckily, researchers who've looked at the malware say it isn't very good. But it's going to get better. It's going to get better. Our adversaries are going to use LLMs and genAI to deliver malware. And in fact, as I said, the well-resourced adversaries have been using machine learning to build malware for nearly a decade at least. So we should be worried. David covered misinformation quite a bit. And so I'm not going to go down this path too much. These are all things that that are dangerous, obviously. And you know, he covered deep fakes rather in depth. Why bore you with it for the second time? But is it real? Yeah, it's very real. I will tell you that ChatGPT, when asked about me, author Brook S.E. Schoenfield, it said I was a woman in her 30s. I'm obviously not a woman. I'm obviously, I present as male, I am. And I am obviously never written a fiction. And, you know, I wrote fantasy novels. By the way, I checked the fantasy novel it named, and somebody else wrote it. So it was an entirely fictional person it was describing, who teaches in Tennessee. Now, I live in Montana, and I teach in Montana, as well as being CTO of Resilient Software Security and a few other things, few industry things I'm participating in. Yeah, but worse than this, it gets stuff wrong. My friend Helen Umberger set me straight, because I had an opportunity to deliver this same talk last week. Somebody didn't show up, and they said, hey, Brook, can you bring that AI talk? And I said, sure. You never get to do these things 2 or 3 times. You do them once, right? But here I am. This is the 3rd time I've given this talk in 2 weeks. Amazing. I might even get it right this time. Wow. At least I know what I'm going to say. Yeah, but Helen told me about a case, told us all about a case, which is really amazing, about a medical insurance company that decided to get rid of its claims adjusters and put an AI in. Trained the AI, it seemed to do the right thing. Guess what happened? They are being sued for millions and millions of dollars because that AI denied lots of claims that were valid. Oh, it did. Yes, and they're being sued heavily. Why? Because AIs, you know, just because you got your training and it looked correct doesn't mean when it gets out in the field it's going to be doing the correct thing. And she gave us 3 or 4 different examples like that. There was a financial institution that was having decisions made based on AI, and it got them wrong, and they are being sued. Class action suit. Okay, so that's real. Misinformation is not. I just thought I'd bring that out for you. So if your companies are thinking of putting AI instead of human beings, can you check the work, please? Unless, of course, you have a lot of lawyers and you want to go to court. Usually that's something to be avoided, as far as my lawyer friends tell me, the legal department. They just get things wrong. I told you about hallucination. Guess what? I do not run product security and privacy at Google. However, somebody just a few weeks ago Googled my name, a chatbotted my name, and they got back. It got a few things right about my CV. By the way, my LinkedIn profile has my current CV, and it is in fact correct. And why it couldn't read that, I don't know. It's, you know, but yeah, it got it wrong, really wrong. So it hallucinates. Things go wrong. They aren't necessarily doing these things right. And one of the problems is we've built these things to come up with an answer. I think that may be one of our biggest mistakes. Because if you push them, they'll come up with an answer, some kind of an answer, and often wrong. So you got to fact check them. In fact, my CEO of Resilient, he was playing around with a chatbot for the first time, and I've been doing it for a year for various reasons. And he, and machine learning going way back. And he sends me this text after about 5 hours of trying to wrestle with the thing. And he says, these things lie. Yeah, so incorrect decisions, I covered that. Very important. Hallucinations. What is Copilot trained on? I covered this too. It's covered, that's the thing in GitHub, right? Everybody knows what Copilot is. You know, it's codes for you. It's trained on the 4 million vulnerabilities in the open source in GitHub. Now that 4 million vulnerabilities, you know, that's counting vulnerabilities totals that's another conversation. Terrible way to manage vulnerabilities. However, it's important to know that it got trained on all those. So yeah, at massive scale, things, bad training data. Okay, let's look at some friends. This has been true for a long time. One of the cool things that we were working on at McAfee in my day there was orchestration. Human-assisted, AI-assisted human orchestration of, anybody run a SOC, a Security Operations Center? Really fun for your analysts. How often do your analysts burn out? Can you get 2 years out of them before they want to do something else? Yes, this guy goes, yeah, maybe 2 years, maybe. 18 months? Survive 18 months? Survive a year. A year, yeah, he says up, year. Who gets them to survive for a year? Let's see some thumbs here. Yeah, okay. 2 years. Yeah, right. Why? Because it's very hard. It's a very hard job. It's the same stuff every day. It burns you out. And you're also on call on weekends and nights because things happen at weekends and nights. Yeah, it's a tough job. It's a great entry job, by the way. You learn a lot about security doing it. So when I've had to deal with SOCs, I've always said, this is a temporary job for you. You will learn and then you will go someplace else. And we'll get somebody else straight out of college or straight out of, tech school or something to do this. By the way, do you need a college degree to be in the SOC? No. No. And so if you're demanding people have a 4-year degree and all kinds of experience, I think I just want to throw in, that's why we have a shortage of SOC people. Because, yeah, that's a little overqualified. And you'll learn, right? So, task enhancement. Task enhancement is important. And I think that's a big area for us on the cybersecurity side. I also think, again, malware detection, evil detection, indicators of compromise detection, all these things can be enhanced with genAI. Definitely someplace, and we're using it for these things. This is happening now, so yeah, it's good. And I already talked about malware detection. We've been doing that for a long time. Oops. They're really good at correlation. This looks like this. This looks like this. This looks like this. For instance, somebody, a researcher just recently, I think it was a Harvard researcher, tested one of the big models on arithmetic problems that were like, that occurred before 2021. 100% score. 100% did it right. Problems occurring after 2021, this is before they moved ChatGPT, so it was still trained on everything up to 2021 and no later. And so problems that arrive after 2021, it scored 0. So is it really creative? Remember why I kind of dispensed with this whole idea of super intelligence? Guess what? It does better with problems with numbers that occur more often in the training set than it does with problems of numbers that are new to it. We're not talking about intelligence here. Correlation, though, is something it does really, really well. Anywhere where we have a correlation problem, I would say that's rife for disruption. Reduce false positives. There's a lot of work going on. I don't know if anybody here is in the expo, but when I was at RSA, there were a few companies who were using genAI. Anybody in the AppSec business, what do you think of false positives? You don't have any, right? It's not really a problem. I have been wrestling with false positives, the huge number of false positives that tools throw out since 2003. Okay? And has the situation gotten better? Only modestly in my career. I'm talking about 20 years. I've been doing this. 20 years, and I'm still using tricks to get around the horrible false positive problem. Imagine if we can get some genAI to finally reduce this. And people are working on this. People are. So expect in the next year or so some real movement, I hope. I'm really praying, because this is the bane of AppSec. This is absolutely the bane of AppSec. If you do AppSec, this is the hard thing, and that's what I do, AppSec, right? Patterns. Obviously, code improvement. I'm a little worried about low code, no code, though, because what's happening is we're getting coders now who have no education in coding, none. And they just go to the GPT and say, I want some Python that does X. And boom, do they know the code it works correctly? Do they have the skills? No. Do they have the skills to see if it's vulnerable? No. So that's a little problem, and that's going to grow, because we're going to see a boom of people who are not security researchers or coders writing code who have no idea what they're looking at. And is the internet, it doesn't have any vulnerabilities, right? Today. No, in 2011, somebody did some estimates, and they were estimating that something like 500,000 vulnerabilities were getting issued every week on the internet. You know, that's why the attackers have that's why those lovely little, long strings on the URLs and the phishing attacks, that's somebody's website that's been whacked, right? Yeah. So, but here's a good thing. What's the bane of coders? Doing the rote, covering a whole bunch of API routines so that you can change them out if you need to, right? That's really boring, I can tell you. I wrote hundreds of thousands of lines of commercial code before they kicked me upstairs in security and I stopped writing code for a living. Hundreds of thousand lines, very boring. It's one of the places where I make the most mistakes because I'm really bored, and that's dangerous. Well, Copilot's really good at that stuff, and it's also good at writing comments, a thing that, no, my code is self-documenting. I don't need to write comments. Anybody heard that from some arrogant coder? Yeah, right. Right. We all need to comment our code, but Copilot will do that for you really nicely. Here's what it does. Bam, your comments are done. That's great. That finally makes our code maybe maintainable. Unless, of course, you're writing poetry in code. My very first code review, this is back in, must have been 1987. My very first code review, yeah, I've been around a long time. I got almost 40 years. Next October will be 40 years in high tech as a coder. My first code review was my brilliant friend Andrew Kern, who wrote an entire poem in this graphic thing. And that was my first code review. To say I was overmatched is maybe kind to me. Yeah, it was a brilliant code, by the way, and it did work, but it was really hard to follow. It was beautiful, though. Can code be poetry? Yes, it can. Andrew had proved that 40 years ago. All right, writing comments. These are some really good places to use this technology, I think. Basically, to wind up here, I think we're in a double bind. If we do not use AI as security people, we're going to be overmatched because the adversaries have been using some of these tools for a long time. So it's an arms race, and I don't see a way out of it. You can sit and say, no, I'm not going to use this thing and be maybe purer than I am. But my attitude is, I got to meet my adversary as best I can. Why? Because are we winning? Is this a celebration of how the adversaries are all running around that, I haven't had any breaches for the last year? I think not. This is hard, what we do, and it matters. And, never mistake that when you go to work, even if it's the crappiest day you've ever had. Never mistake that what we do matters. And it matters to our customers, our stakeholders, our organizations, and to the world. Remember, 7 billion people counting on decent software? Right? So I don't think we're going to get out of it. Are there solutions? I don't know how smart I am, but here's some things. We can diversify. We can spread out these things. We can not lose the human in the equation because we're still smarter than these things and they aren't super intelligent. Sorry. It seems like they are. I always say please and thank you to chatbot. I don't know why I do that because that's the way I talk to people anyway. And it always comes back with, oh, you're welcome. I feel so, like I'm having a human interaction. But believe me, that's just a programmed response. We can train to constrain so that they're specific. And I just want to encourage you all to advocate for AI ethics. I want to encourage you all. This is really important. And we got to start now because it's coming, whether we like it or not. Pandora's box is open. It's there. We're here. Whether you like it or not, we're here. So this is my call to action to you. Be involved. Understand the issues, understand what your organization's doing, understand what our society's doing. Because let me ask you this, have you ever, as technologists, been pleased with a piece of legislation about technology that has come out of a government? Ever? Look at GDPR. Has anybody read Article 82? The security article? We know what it says. It says you shall have commercially reasonable security. That's it. There are 4 little subtexts that are equally bland. So, the courts get to decide what's commercially reasonable, right? Those are the people I really want doing my technology for me, is judges and juries. No, it isn't. So who better than us? Who better? Your brilliant minds need to be put on this problem. And I ask you to be involved and to be paying attention because who else? Who else cares? You picked up the burden of security. If you've been around for a long time, you picked up the burden of security back in the day when it was security. Isn't that somebody else's problem? I haven't met that developer in a long time, by the way. Developers care about security. They just don't know what to do. That's a different talk. But, I haven't met that person in a long time. And I work with people all over the globe. But back in the day, who picked up the security and why did you stick with it? Because you cared. One of the things I love about security is all the people who really care and are here because it matters, and you know that. Even on your worst day, you know that. So who better to deal with? No, I'm not suggesting we stand in streets with placards. It's just a great image, right? And it suggests what I want. I'm not suggesting that we go sit in, at some congressman critter's office. No, but be involved, please. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.